Hi there guys and girls, this is Commander Ozor bringing you another episode of How Do I Play Elite Dangerous, and today we are going to do a whistle-stop tour of the controls. I think the biggest time sink is at the beginning, especially if you don't know what you're doing because you're new, in terms of understanding what the controls do and figuring out which ones are useful and mapping them to useful buttons on your joysticks or keyboards and mouse. I would recommend buying a joystick, possibly two joysticks, possibly one of those thrusting joystick things, possibly foot pedals or rudder pedals. If you've got a gaming wheel, that can also work quite nicely, especially when you go into your SRV for planetary playing around. Also, if you've got an Xbox controller, that can work, but I think you'll find that you'll be one axis short of happiness. This game does require a lot of control mappings, and unfortunately, you just have to have the equipment to do it. I think you can get a pretty cheap joystick for about £30 or £40 that can do most of what you want when coupled with a regular keyboard and mouse. Right, so let's just look through what I think are important controls, and if there's anything else that I miss out, then obviously it's important to you and not to me. So mouse controls, that's pretty self-explanatory, but there's nothing here that I would normally go to. Some people use mouse and keyboard for playing Elite Dangerous, and some of them are really good players who do a lot of PvP, and they use the mouse because it gives you a lot of accuracy when using railguns at long range or short range or whatever. But personally, I find it difficult, so I don't use keyboard and mouse for flying my ship. Flight rotation. Okay, this is an important one. So this is your yaw. That is basically turning left and right, not rolling, turning. So yaw. That is important. If you're on an Xbox controller, you might want to consider yaw into roll. On either one of these two. You have to see if it works for you. That basically cuts down on an axis, which might work for you. I try it a few times and I haven't managed to make it work for me. There is a threshold here where if you yaw a certain amount, you start rolling. But personally, I'd prefer to have a control for each. Oh, that looks interesting. A yaw roll button. I don't think I could personally get my head around that. I think that would be too confusing. Roll axis, this is an important one. So this would normally be your left and right movement of your joystick in your right hand, if you're right-handed. Pitch axis, that's basically up and down. Now you notice I've got this inverted. It depends on what type of person you are, how your brain's wired. I've inverted this one. So lateral thrust and vertical thrust. So this is lateral, which means left and right. So I have mapped that to a little wiggly joystick in my front left finger. I've actually got a Thrustmaster to the 16000M or something like that, and the associated thrust control. So if you look that up, you can see what I mean. Yeah, so I've mapped that to my finger control, my left hand first finger. So that's our vertical control there is also mapped to that, so I can go up, down, left and right using my left finger. So those are important. Oh, look, I've inverted that one. That's just because it's upside down on my controller, but you may not need to do that. These are important for fighting. You can play the game without using lateral thrust and vertical thrust apart from when you're landing. But you'll find that you'll be at a disadvantage in terms of combat, so it's useful to have these axes, and this is why I'm saying in terms of the Xbox controller you'll run out of axes, and these are probably the axes that you're going to sacrifice. You can probably have one of them, but not both, unless you get a foot pedal or something like that. Alternative flight controls, I don't use this. Some people may. You press a button and you instantly get different controls, so it's up to you if you want to explore that. Flight throttle. Okay, throttle axis. This is my left hand. This is my thrust throttle joystick thing. I don't actually know the name of it. You can probably tell me. I've got it inverted for some reason. I don't know why, but it is. I think that just basically means that moving it forwards makes me go forwards, and moving it back makes me stop. because this is a forward only rather than a full range. Now the Thrustmaster X or whatever it is, that's got a forward and a back, and that is really useful. I bought these controllers, and I don't really like the fact that I can only go forwards, so therefore I have to use a button to make my craft go into reverse, which has its benefits, but mostly its flaws. I don't like it. I'd rather just have a control to change it. And this is why I'm saying 2 joysticks could be fun, because I think it could be very fun. There's a commander I've noticed on Facebook, Elite Dangerous Community, that uses 2 joysticks, and I think it's really good. I can't remember his name, but if anyone's interested, I can comment in the comment section below and let you know. The rest of this I do not use. See, it's all blank. Flight landing overrides. So you'd use this if you're coming into a station and you extend your landing gear. When you extend your landing gear, your controls change to whatever you set here. Now, that's useful if you don't have enough axes. Say, for instance, you're on an Xbox controller. But for me, I want to have all the axes all the time because I like to do combat. So I don't use this section at all. So these just give you all the controls that you would normally have access to, just another version of it. And when you extend your flight landing, then it changes your controls to whatever are here. Put your landing gear away and it turns back to normal. Flight miscellaneous. Okay, toggle flight assist. Toggle flight assist is useful for, I'd say, advanced combat maneuvers. It basically turns off the helper that means that when you deaccelerate, your ship slows down, and when you accelerate, it accelerates up to a certain speeds and then stays at that speed. That's what flight assist does. When you turn flight assist off, what happens is that you accelerate, and you keep on accelerating by however much your acceleration is. And when you deaccelerate, it just means that you're not accelerating anymore, but you're still going forwards at whatever speed you were at when you stopped accelerating. If you want to slow down, then you have to go into reverse, and then eventually you'll slow down, and then eventually you'll go past 0 and you'll go into reverse. Also, you'll lose control of your roll and your yaw, which will just be free running basically. So I think I map this to a button, and I do it momentarily so that I can just press the button and get a bit of flight assist off. The advantage being that it increases your turning circle when you boost. So you boost, you turn flight assist off, you turn very rapidly, but you still keep on going in like the backwards direction, which is useful for a combat maneuver, and it's relatively easy to do. So I would say that toggle flight assist needs to be for a button if you don't just flight assist off all the time. And if you do flight assist off all the time, then you are a genius. Okay, so we've got engine boost. This is a useful command. You want to have that probably on your right-hand joystick. I use it on, I think it's my thumb, maybe to the left-hand side of the hat control on my joystick. Toggle frameshift drive. So when you buy the game and run it for the first time, this toggle frameshift drive is kind of like a meta for the controls underneath. So you press one button and then you either go to hyperspace or you go to super cruise. One or the other, depending on what you've got selected, depending on what you're doing. So this can often cause confusion. So I'd recommend unmapping the toggle frameshift drive and then mapping 2 buttons for super cruise and 1 for hyperspace. Now I've mapped these on my left hand control using a modifier button, and then I think it's my second finger for like an up-down type control. So up makes me go to hyperspace and down goes to super cruise. So it's a modifier plus a button for these 2. Or is it? No, looking at that, it's just the button. I've got the modifier for something else. So I'll come on to that later. So yes, my left hand, second finger, 1 button, 1 button. There we go. Correction. Rotational correction, I don't use this very often, and you can access it from your menus in your ship. Toggle orbit lines makes the game look a little bit nicer. I think it's nicer for explorers if you want to turn off all the helpful lines showing the orbital paths of planets. Right, okay, targeting. So this is a useful section. So select target ahead. I've got that mapped to my right hand joystick underneath my hat. It's a common button to press. I would recommend having this. cycle next target and cycle previous target. These are useful buttons. You can use these for cycling through targets in a system when you're in Super Cruise, which is very, very useful for just having a look at what's around you. You can also use it in a combat situation for cycling through all the ships to see what's around you. Well, I've mapped that to my left hand to one of the hat controls for forwards and backwards. Then similar thing, but just next hostile target and previous hostile target, and that's on the same hat, but just up and down basically. That's forwards and backwards, and those are up and down. And then I've got select highest threat, which is actually quite useful because what you'll find is that someone's shooting you and you want to target them. So I've basically mapped it. You can see Joy 7. Joy 7 is basically the button that does hostile, but with a modifier. Look, there's my Joy 2 on my left-hand controller. It's annoying that they don't differentiate between the two controllers there. You see two Joy 2s, but one's my right hand and the other one is my left hand, which is annoying. These select wingmans are useful, and you know what? I need to actually map these anyway, so I'm going to map these now. And actually what I like to do is have all my joystick commands on the right and all my keyboard commands on the right. And select there, and wingman navlock. So I'll just briefly say what these are. So you can have 4 wingmen in your squad, in your wing. You will need to select the wingman, and then if you want to select the wingman's target, you'll have had to have selected them and then select their targets. So 7 and then 0 will get you the hostile person attacking your wingman 1. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Another thing that you'll do when you're in a wing is use your wingman navlock. So you'll use this to when you're in Super Cruise, you'll select a wingman and then you'll turn navlock on, so that when you get close to them, you'll disengage Super Cruise and drop into their instance. Let's say you're flying along and you go to a combat zone. Your wingman's already there or has arrived before you, whatever. You turn navlock on for that wingman, and when you get close, it'll drop you in with them. And you don't even need to be going slow. You can go quite fast and it will still drop you in, so it's pretty good at saving a little bit of time. The only caveat for this is that when you're trying to leave and your navlocked wingman is still in real space, then when you leave, you go to Super Cruise, it'll then drop you immediately back into that instance because you're really close again. So bit of a loop problem there, unfortunately. Okay, moving on. We have cycle next subsystem and cycle previous subsystem. These are important controls when you're trying to do module sniping. So if you've got missiles, pack-hound missiles, etc., or if you're trying to shoot things in particular like cargo hatches, then you'll need to have selected the subsystem. So I've just used my modifier and then modified my next and previous. As you can see there, 8 and 10 with the modifier. So those are useful things to have, but slightly more advanced, so maybe not something to worry about immediately, but something to plan for when you're mapping your controls. Target next system in route. Okay, this is an important control, and you can see there I was struggling with all my modifiers. I've had to use 2 modifiers, and the Joy 1 is actually my reverse direction button. So if I mess up my controls when I'm with my hands when I'm piloting, then I won't select the next system in route, and I'll just go into reverse, which is annoying. So yeah, I need to probably choose something better, but that's what I've settled on for the moment. So target next system en route, that basically means when you're trying to go somewhere and you've been faffing around looking at various targets, etc., then if you want to just lock back onto the main place that you're going, say a system or a planet, then you press this button and it reselects the main target where you're trying to get to, the plotted route. You know when you plot route in system? Yeah, that's what it'll do. Right, let's close this down and move on to weapons. We have primary fire, secondary fire, so that's in my right hand, and yeah, so this is to the left of my hat, and the boost is to the right of my hat. That's what I said earlier. So sorry about that, I got that slightly wrong. Muscle memory and all that. Next fire group, previous fire group, also important controls. Now, I got into a habit of using my analog left-hand controller for this, and I think most people wouldn't use this, but I got into the habit of doing it, and that's what I'm used to, and I can't break out of it, so that's why it's mapped to an analog control rather than a button or something like that. Okay, so let's have a look at deploy hardpoints. So this is a useful button to have available. Now I've mapped it to 2 buttons. On my right-hand joystick I've got a load of buttons on the face, on the fascia of the joystick kind of main body, and these are great in terms of having buttons that are kind of nearby, but it's annoying because you have to take your hands off the joystick to access the button. So if I get myself in a tiz, then I can press this button because I know where it is, but I have to take my hands off the joystick. But if I want something a little bit more kind of easy to use and in my joystick all the time, then I've got it mapped to my right-hand joystick hat, point left, which is, it's an important control, but you know, what I'd normally map it to, like charge ECM or something like that, I don't normally use ECMs, so that's why I've just, you know, reallocated it to something useful, even though it's kind of the wrong kind of control to use. Firing deploys hardpoints. That's useful to have on, I'd say, unless you accidentally fire a lot and get yourself in trouble, in which case you might want to turn that off, especially if you're in a station. The station will blow you up. Or if you're outside of the station, you'll get fines. So use that to control your inability to press buttons correctly. Okay, so now we are going to look at the cooling. So silent running and deploy heatsink. These are kind of dangerous controls, so I'd map it to somewhere slightly further away than what you're going to press. I can't actually remember where these are, but you'll use them for silent running builds, or if you're doing smuggling. Silent running basically closes the heat vents on your ship, so that you're not producing any heat. Instead you're storing the heat, and you'll get hotter and hotter and hotter until you go over 100%, and then you'll start incurring module damage and hull damage because fires are breaking out on your ship, and then you'll blow up. So watch out for silent running. Turn it on, turn it off. Deploy heatsink. So these heatsinks are a utility, and you use them to reduce your heat to 0. When you do that, everything will go very cold, and you'll stop producing so many emissions. So gimbal turrets will need to be closer to seeing you before they get a lock and shoot you. So deploy heatsink only really if you're going to use, and you have them fitted to your ship. Is that going to be useful? So a lot of people that use heatsinks. I don't use heatsinks, but that's because I'm a noob. Okay, miscellaneous. Here we go. Ship lights. Everyone likes ship lights. I've got that on one of my right-hand joysticks fascia areas. It's kind of useful to have that. I know where it is. I can use my touch on my right hand to find where the button is. I don't mind taking my hand off my right-hand joystick to find that button. So yes, I've mapped this to one of the random little twiddly knobs on my left hand, so I can zoom in and zoom out, which is useful for when you're zooming around in Super Cruise. You can see different planets, and you can see where people are relative to where you are. It's also useful if you're in your SRV on a planet. So there we go. I don't really use it so much when I'm in real space, in combat and stuff like that, but you can use it there as well. It's useful. Oh, I say what, it's useful for picking up materials when you're in space, when you've blown someone up or something like that, and you need to see where things are. Okay, moving on, we've got divert power to engines, weapons and systems, and power distribution resets. Well, these are very important. I use these on my left-hand control. It's one of the hats. I go up to do engines, right, which is actually forwards for me, to do weapons, and left, which is actually toward me, backwards, for systems, and then I go down for doing power resetting the power distribution. Reset HMD. I don't actually know what that stands for. Heads mounted display users. Okay. Maybe that's useful for some of you VR people, but I haven't got VR, so I don't know about that. Cargo scoop is useful, and landing gear is useful. So you know I said earlier about Super Cruise and hyperspace. That button is used for cargo scoop and landing gear, but with the modifier as well. So you can see that there. Jettison all cargo. I would recommend unmapping this control because you don't want to vent all your cargo most of the time. If you're getting interdicted by a pirate, an NPC, or a player, they may ask you to vent some of your cargo. But I'd recommend doing that from your right-hand panel and not doing it using the big button. Sure, some people will disagree with me, but you'll be losing a lot of money venting your expensive cargo, so don't do that. Microphone mute is used when you're using in-game audio to talk to people, which is kind of useful, but I haven't set that up yet because I'm just using Discord most of the time. Okay, so we've got a few things here. Shield cell, chaff launcher, charge ECM. So, shield cells are optional internals, which you can trigger to regenerate your shields. When you press the button, it has a spin up time of a few seconds, and then when it's spun up, it charges your shields up for a couple of seconds. When it's spinning up and when it's charging your shields, it's producing a large amount of heat. So you'll find that people that use shield cells often couple them with heat sinks as well. So sometimes they use those in terms of you can map them to fire groups, but I like to have them mapped to an individual control. The advantage of using fire groups is that you can trigger the heat sink and the shield cell at the same time. Okay, so moving on to chaff launcher. This is a useful thing to buy, especially for starter ships. It scrambles your enemies' gimbaled weapons and turreted weapons so that they're not locked onto you. The gimbals kind of fly around everywhere, but sometimes they do actually line up on you, so it will reduce the damage efficiency of your enemy by about, I don't know, 75%, 80%, depending on how far away they are. If they're really close, like within 100 meters or so, then they're going to hit you anyway, so that you need to be a distance away. Charge ECM is you hold the button down and it charges the ECM, and when you release, the longer you've been holding the button down for, the larger the kind of nova blast radius of electronic countermeasure there is around your craft that is used for disabling, I think, torpedoes and missiles. However, I find that combat situations are so frantic that if I've lost my shields and people are firing missiles at me that are locked on, or torpedoes, I'm probably running away anyway. So that's the reason why I don't use ECM, because I am running. I am running faster than the missile, hopefully. Now, I haven't been targeted by a torpedo before. I think maybe it would be useful if you're doing PvP. But it's a difficult one to master, and you have to hold it down, and that means you can't fire with your secondary fire group because I've mapped it to my right-hand hat to one of the buttons there. So, yeah, very tentative. Enable context menu. I don't know what that is. I don't know what any of those is. Any of those are. Night vision, I've mapped that to one of my right-hand joystick kind of fascia buttons. You might want to map that to a keyboard button. It is useful for when you're doing mining and it's really dark and you still want to see the asteroids. It's also useful for when you're in an SRV and it's dark and you want to see stuff on the floor before you crash into it. I mean, you can see it using your SRV lights, but it's nice having night vision anyway. Some people don't like night vision, so you don't have to be exactly like me. Right, so user interface focus mode. This is something to think about. Hold the user interface focus button to enter focus mode. Then use the directions, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I don't use this very often, but something to be aware of. Basically, I think you can press a button to cycle between things. Anyway, I don't use it, so I can't really talk about it too much. These, on the other hand, are useful. So external panel, comms panel, roll panel, and internal panel. Now, I can never remember which one's which, so I have to try and think about it before I set it. External interface panel. Comms panel. Well, the comms panel is the top left one, where you chat to people and set wings. The roll panel is the bottom one, where you see a sensor and where you launch your SRV from. Internal panel, that's the one on the right-hand side. and therefore the external panel is the one on the left-hand side. Enter, yeah, on quick comms I do that. Right, and then these controls are also useful to do. So I've got this Tobii eye tracking thing, as you can see my eyes moving around, and what I could do is look in a certain direction, and when I get to the panel it will then focuses up on it and it brings it up. Now I used to do that, but I kind of found it annoying when I was looking around, and it took a while to get to the different panels, so I actually just use a control to switch between the panels, these controls here, which by the way is my left hand throttle control, and I've mapped that to one of the hats, the bottom hat to be precise. So as a result, yes, I've got these set to does nothing, so when I look in the direction of the panel it does nothing. Yes, I could focus on the panel, and you might want to have the focus on the panel if you're in VR. So when you look in that direction it brings the panel up, and then you can start interacting with the panel. Enable user interface camera lock on. When this option is enabled, the camera will turn and lock to the user interface panel. Okay, so this is useful for me, and it would probably be useful only if you're mapping these buttons to these controls to these buttons. So when it's locked on, that means that when you press the button it moves your head to look at the panel. If it's off, then what will happen is you press the button, your interface will pop up, but it'll be out of the field of vision. So yeah, I mean, with my Tobii eye tracking I could turn that off. I could raise up my panel and then look in that direction, but the numbers of times that I'll be raising the panels up and not looking in the direction and then wondering why things aren't working, it's not worth it. So that's the reasoning behind that. I hope that kind of makes sense. You'd have to probably just have a little fiddle with that yourself. Okay, so moving on, we've got the galaxy map and system map. So here we have two kind of important buttons, I'd say. You do quite often go to the galaxy map and system map, and yes, you can get to that from your left-hand panel, but I like to have individual buttons set to it. So those are actually on my right-hand joystick fascia. So a couple of the buttons with the blind dots on it. You'd know if you have the joystick. Basically, there's some of the buttons have little dots on, so you can get a bit of ergonomic feedback. Try and figure out where things are. Don't use CQC score screen. If you're doing a bit of fighty, then yes, that might be useful. Head look. If you don't have a Tobii eye tracking and you want to look around, then you can try mapping head look. But I found that when I did that, it was really annoying. So I would just recommend buying a Tobii eye tracker or a head tracker hardware to do the head looking for you. It is definitely better when you can look around in your ship. If you really want to get a button for doing it, you might want to use the mouse for doing it maybe, or you could just have some kind of button that does head look. Like I said, I've only failed when I've tried to do this before. Games menu, I've got that mapped to my escape key by default, so if you wanted to have that on your joystick then you could. I'd probably kind of semi-recommend you do that, especially if you're in VR, because otherwise you'll be grasping away around for things, and it's kind of annoying. Friend menu, I don't use that, but you might want to. Open Discovery. Now I need to remap these ones, but for the moment this is what I've got. So when you've got the Discovery scanner, this is when you're in system cruise and you're trying to discover unknown planets. You've dropped into a fresh system, you haven't discovered it at all. You can bring up the Discovery scanner, which I've got set to one of my fascia controls on my right-hand joystick. Switch cockpit mode. So they brought in this feature where you can be in combat mode or, I don't know, discovery mode or something. It's basically the red mode or the blue mode. One's aggressive and one's exploration. So I've got that mapped to one of the random buttons on my right-hand joystick. So this is analysis mode. That's what it's called. Right. Yeah. So some of your modules will need to be in the right mode for. So if you're firing weapons, then you'll need to be in combat mode, and if you're firing your discovery scanner, then you'll need to be in analysis mode. And the same applies for when you're in the full system scanner mode. Yes, that's your detailed surface scanner. Oh, I don't know. It all gets a bit confusing, really. Full spectrum system mode. So yes, the full system spectrum mode. There's a few different scanners. There's the detailed surface scanner, and then there's the discovery scanner. That's how I refer to them as. And I think the FSS mode is the full spectrum system mode. I don't like the terminology. Someone will have to correct me here, but okay, interface mode. Panel up, panel down, left and right. These are important for navigating menus. They're mapped to my right-hand joystick hat. Now, these are the same controls as, you know, the ECM, chaff, shield booster, and another one. But when you're in a panel, it changes the function of the button. So it's okay to double up this hat control. So I've got this mapped to my right-hand joystick hat, which is the one on top, the only hat on my right-hand joystick. Oh no, it's select and back. That's what it is. These are the main buttons for selecting things. So I know what they are now. Yes. So Joy 1, that's my trigger on my right-hand joystick, and Joy 4 is my left of the hat back button. So there we go. Next tab and next page are useful. Those are mapped on my left-hand control, and I think that's kind of forwards and backwards for me. And next page is up and down, so that's one of the hats on the left-hand control, and I think I've doubled that up in a similar fashion to these ones here. So it kind of the same thing. When you're in a panel, the hats are focused on the panel rather than what they're normally focused on, like the ECM, the chaff, etc. Right, head look mode. I don't use this. When you press the head look button, which we talked about earlier, which I said is not a useful button to have, then you can you start using these controls here. Like I said, I'd recommend getting the head tracker or the Tobii eye tracker, or just having a VR headset. I think you might be able to use a webcam to do head looking. So if you've got a webcam, you might want to look into that. I have not looked into that myself, so I can't tell you much more. Galaxy map. Okay, this one is slightly confusing, and I can't tell you off the top of my head which ones do what. But I will try, and if I fail too much, then I'm sorry. So pitch axis, that basically means tilting the camera up and down. That is a useful one to do. Your axis, I think that's rotating the camera around a fixed point. So that's kind of like rotating left and rotating right, kind of swiveling around. Now, translate, I think this means moving yourself around the map. So that means should be up and down. That should be left and right. And then that should be forwards and backwards. But I'm not sure if the Y and Z are actually the wrong way round. I think they probably are by the looks of things. So Y will be like forwards, and X will be left and right. And then, sorry, forwards and backwards. And then Z will probably be up and down, so you'll have to decide how to map those. That makes sense. I've got them on my joystick, but I've also got them on my keyboard as well. As you can see, those are the analog inputs and those are the digital inputs. So that just means that I can do either and be kind of semi-okay. Zoom in and zoom out are also useful to have, but you can use those on your mouse wheel, so don't have to worry about those too much. But as you can see, I've got those mapped as well to a joystick. Galaxy Cam Select Current Home System thingamabob. Yes, I don't know what I've got that map to, but I never use it. Okay, so we've done the Galaxy map. Let's go to driving now. Oh, and by the way, Galaxy map is also the same controls for the system map as well. So kind of useful when you're translating between, like that means just moving around, not moving a camera, just moving like what you're focusing on. Alright, so driving, SRVs, here we are. So drive assist, doesn't really do much when you're in a vehicle, but it's useful to have. I think it basically means your brakes again, similar to when you're in the space, when you're flying around in space, except you've got a little bit more friction. So you'll find that drive assist, when you turn it off, you do stop anyway because of the natural friction of the surface of the planet. So it's useful to have in case you turn it on and you want to turn it off again, knowing roughly which control it is. When you're driving, you kind of have to decide what controls you're going to use. So ideally, in my ideal setup, I would have the joysticks for flying, I would have my steering wheel for driving my SRV around, and maybe when they bring feet, I'll use my keyboard and mouse for, general FPS type stuff. But all those controls do take up a lot of room on the surface, and unless you've got a dedicated gaming area, then that might be annoying. So I just use my joystick for controlling my SRV, whereas some people would use an Xbox controller or the steering wheel. I'd love to use my steering wheel, and once or twice I did, and it was glorious. So you can see some of the default things here. I haven't even looked at these before, so I don't know how useful they are. Steering axis. So this is turning your ship left and right. I think I've got that mapped to my left-hand analog control. The one that I use for fire groups, which I shouldn't be using for fire groups, but I use anyway. Well, that's what's mapped there. And there is an importance to having a fairly sensitive control, something that can deal with a wider range of input variables, because otherwise you'll find that when you're driving your SRV around, then you'll lose control quite easily. If you've like some of the hats, you move them a fraction and you get a big change. Yeah, that's why I've mapped it to my left-hand analog yaw control. That's what it should be used for. Just because it's got a larger range of movement, which means I've got better control over the movement of my SRV, my turning. The roll axis is useful for when you're in the space, correcting the roll of your ship. You can kind of tilt around, same for pitch. Thrusters is very important. Your SRV has got thrusters. You use that when you get yourself upside down, or if you just want to travel faster, you can run up hills and then jump and then fire thrusters. And you have to be careful when you're landing, otherwise you damage yourself. SRV primary and SRV secondary fire are the same controls that I use normally when I'm in my ship. So that'll be right-hand trigger and right-hand button. Handbrake you could use if you were super clever, but I don't use that. Headlights are the same as my ship lights button. Those are useful, and it cycles between off, normal, and high beams. Normal is actually most of the time better than high beams, so don't be fooled. Toggle SRV turret is a useful button to press. I've got that mapped to one of my left-hand hat buttons, and that basically moves you from the driving seat into the turret. You can still control the SRV movement, but it's more focused on the turret and shooting at stuff. So that's useful if you've got sentry skimmers that you need to shoot down. You'll go into the turret and you'll find it easier to shoot them down. Fire groups, oh, I don't know what that does, but yes, I've got those mapped. Driving targeting, select target ahead. Why you need an entire category just for one, I don't know, but they've done it like that. So that is a useful button to have. I've got the same button as my ship select target ahead button. Target controls, so this is pretty self-explanatory, but these are, I think, my right-hand joystick. That's what I'm using. Drive throttle, I've obviously already using my forward-only controller, which is annoying. It'd be great if you had a reverse as well, so I have to press a button to change that. Same deal. Driving miscellaneous, I had to set these. I think you're going to have to set these. You'll probably want them set to the same as your ship. Cargo scoop is useful because when you're picking up materials, you'll want to be able to turn your cargo scoop on. I think you can drive pretty much around all the time with your cargo scoop with no detriment, whereas when you're in a ship with your cargo scoop out, it limits your max speed. Recall dismiss ship is useful because when you land on a planet, when you move away from the ship, eventually the ship will launch and leave you on the planet, and if you want to get your ship back, then you're going to need to call it. You have a limited amount of fuel, which is kind of like your oxygen, so when that runs out, your SRV will blow up. So you do need to be able to get back to your ship between sessions, I think. Don't know if that's true or not. Driving mode switches. Probably just want to set these the same as above. It goes to the different panels. And you've got the same thing for Galaxy and System. think that's probably going to make sense for yourself. Multi-crew, I haven't dealt with any of that myself, so you're going to have to deal with that yourself. Fighter orders, again, I haven't dealt with that myself. You're going to have to deal with that yourself. Camera suite, this is a feature that Elite Dangerous released, so you can play around with the camera of your ship. I think I've set these kind of to basic things. But yeah, I think the number pads are useful, but I've got basically a button on my right-hand joystick fascia that enables the camera suite mode. There's one of those ones. Yeah, there you go, those two buttons. And then I just, if I can remember, I would use the number pad buttons to go there. Those are the defaults. Free camera is basically like the camera suite, but just you can do what you want. I haven't done that because it's too complicated and I don't have enough controls. Store camera, that does it when you're docked. Again, same deal. Hollow Me, yeah, I did the Hollow Me ages ago and that was that. Playlist is if you've got some music that you want to play in-game, rather than using, you know, a normal program to play music. Full spectrum system scanner is, like I was saying earlier, there's a load of scanners that you can buy. I think the full systems, it's basically a detailed surface scanner. I think that's what that is. Yeah, you have to set the controls so that you can navigate in and around. Zoom in, zoom out. Oh, yes. Full system spectrum scanner. That's your discovery scanner. That's what it is. Yes, so you... there are a couple of interesting things here, actually. So zoom in to target and zoom out, and then stepped in and stepped out. I think that's my trigger in my right hand, and that is my, you know, back button or, you know, secondary fire button. And you use that to scan an unknown system for planets and settlements and signal sources. You probably just benefit from having a look at the help file and then just having a play around yourself with that. It's a little bit complicated, but you get used to it soon. In terms of the tuning, you tune your radio frequency scanner thing to different frequencies to pick up either, like on the left hand side will be signal sources, and then you go to the middle, which will be small planets, then you get to the right, which will be larger planets like gas giants and suns, etc. I use tuning and I map that to my left hand analog yaw stick kind of control. You can have absolute tuning as well, which is, say, if you had a little slider that you could move up and down and it stayed in the same position. This one here, my left hand yaw control, resets down to the middle when I release it. So it just kind of changes the tuning, and then when I stop pressing the button, it stops moving the tuning fork slightly. Right, so you do need to discover the system before you scan it. So you need to have the, you know your discovery scanner button there, which is actually the same as the full system scanner. That's the confusing thing. The discovery scanner is the full system scanner. It's just it does two different modes. And then that button there I've mapped to a button on my fascia of my right hand joystick, which probably could be something else, but I need to change that at some point. The rest of it I don't think I have much use for, apart from the target current signal, which I probably don't use very often, but maybe use sometimes. Detailed surface scanner, so I was talking about this earlier. You can scan planets, and you can look at rings. Yes, you'll want to set these when you've got a detailed surface scanner and you want to scan rings. Okay, so I have gone through all of the controls, and that took a long time, but hopefully that is maybe useful for you. So thank you very much and have a good day.